Welcome back to OpenLine, talking about guns and gun shows at the Metro Nashville Fairgrounds. And it kind of gets into a bigger conversation as well. But we have with us Tennessee State Senate Majority Leader Lee Harris and John Harris, President of Tennessee Firearms Association. Let's go back to the phones. Devin. Hello, Devin. Devin, are you there? I'm going to come back to you, okay? Turn down your TV. Let's go to Kathy. Hello, Kathy.
Yes, hi.
Hi, go right ahead.
Yes, my question is for Mr. John Harris. I wondered if Mr. Harris had read the January 1999 report issued by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms entitled Gun Shows, Brady Checks, and Crime Gun Traces, in which it was stated that violations occurring at gun shows and substantial numbers of firearms associated with gun shows were used in drug crimes, crimes of violence, as well as being passed illegally to juveniles, and what his opinion on that report was.
Okay, what about that?
Well, I'm not familiar with that report since it's 15 years old. I don't take any quibble at all with the ATF if they've done such a report. But part of the problem with any type of conclusion like that is we've got a saturation level in the entire Southeast, if not the nation, of gun ownership. You know, with people that have owned guns for decades, they've been passed down through families, and the transfers that are taking place in these gun shows are really de minimis in terms of the total volume of guns that are already available in the system. If you look at the TBI data in Tennessee, for example, you'll see that they tend to report that on average we have about 300,000 background checks a year. And some of those are certainly multi-gun transfers. But if we're only transferring, say, double it, 600,000 guns a year, you know, that doesn't really measure up significantly against the volume of them that are already out there, because it's an accumulating number. So you can't really point to the gun show as opposed to thefts from homes or yard sales or any other transaction venue as the real substance of the problem, particularly when the gun shows themselves are heavily regulated and monitored by local law enforcement and ATF.
But what was interesting about this is that when the board voted, someone from the district attorney's office got up and listed 3 specific cases where there was a purchase at the gun show without a background check by a felon. One of them, they wound up selling guns in some sort of crime ring in Australia. 2 other AR-15s were sold to people that shouldn't have gotten them. This is what they testified to. So it's not a 15-year-old report. That's what was just said. And the notion that it's a saturation point, isn't there, and this gets into a bigger issue. It gets into the whole gun show loophole. I mean, it gets into the concern that guns are getting into the hands of people at these gun shows, and it's kind of it's an opportunity for people to get them, whereas if they went to a licensed dealer, they couldn't. So I guess it is kind of this bigger issue. And are you concerned that Metro is trying to, in some way, implement an end to the gun show loophole, overstepping their bounds in that, when it comes to that?
Oh, absolutely. They've got no legal authority to get into that venue at all.
But then the question, why? The question would be, okay, well, it seems like Metro has some reason to do it. So why not do it here?
Well, because it's a proffered reason with no substantive basis. Because you talk about the gun show loophole, first I would argue there is no loophole. It's the way federal law is designed and has been designed since 1968 when they passed the Gun Control Act. That's been there the whole time. And it's not a loophole, it's what's called the casual sale exemption under federal law. It can be applied at a gun show as long as it's 2 individuals that are non-licensed dealers making the transfer, but that's not the volume that you see. Because the ATF will say, even if you don't think you're a dealer, if you're doing enough volume of business with the guns, you then become an unlicensed dealer, which is a federal felony itself. But the casual sale exception, which is really what this is, it's not a loophole. It applies in this parking lot if you have an estate sale. I mean, I've had probate estates where we've sold dozens, if not hundreds of guns, usually through an auction. But those sell. There used to be sales by the Metro Police Department of forfeited guns that you could go up to and buy legally as a citizen without a background check.
And my understanding is the reason it was in place is, so a farmer could sell a gun to maybe his kid or something, and wouldn't, or his neighbor, and wouldn't have to go through a background check.
Correct.
But at these gun shows, we know now there are 3 cases at least where it happens. So should there be some change?
No, because 3 incidents, and they haven't told us any kind of data, so whether we can look at what was the total volume of NCIC checks during those 3 events. So we don't have any comparative data to tell us if there was 3 sales out of 5, so it's a 60% problem, or 3 sales out of 300,000. We don't know what the 3 stands for. And if it's a very small number of violators, like DUIs that result in fatalities that create the problem, is that enough that the government should step in and say we're going to totally ban the activity for everybody else? And our position is, as the Tennessee Firearms Association, is no, that's an unjustifiable interference.
Senator, what do you think before I take more calls?
Well, I think we've got to defer to the board for the fairgrounds. I mean, the board for the fairgrounds is a pretty legitimate panel. Nashville just had a city election. You have a mayor, you have new city council members, and that comes with some legitimacy, some authority. And they're in control of who goes on that board, and they've exercised their authority to put those people in place, and those people have a fiduciary duty to make sure that the board conducts itself appropriately. And so I think we've got to trust them, because I'm not an expert, and maybe John is, and maybe you are. I'm not an expert on the fairgrounds. I'm not an expert on that facility. I'm not an expert on the threat or the information that they were privy to. But in their considered judgment, having served on that board, they thought that there was something that they had to act. And so, I'm not in a place to criticize that. So yeah.
All right, let's go to Liz. Hello, Liz.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. So I've been following this through the news reports and the media, and I just want to say, it seems to me that this issue isn't really about the Second Amendment or even gun laws. Obviously there's a discussion to be had about that, but in relation to the gun shows, not only was there the evidence that the prosecutor, the district attorney, presented of those 3 cases, but there was also information about gang members who had been interviewed by actually I believe it was a News Channel 5 reporter, and the gang members said that they bought their guns at gun shows because it was easy. They said that they could, if they had cash, they could pick out the guns inside and then go out and purchase those guns out in the parking lot. And they said specifically that sometimes they stole guns, but they got arrested, so they preferred to buy guns at the gun shows. So understanding that, as a taxpayer here in Nashville, I have a real concern with the idea that property that my tax dollars fund, that property, that there's this illegal activity going on.
Okay,
there.
all right, thank you. What do you think about that, John?
Well, it's the basic argument I think that the Fair Board commissioners are trying to advance. But let's flip the scenario, because I think it's a specious argument ultimately. Let's take the gun show out. Let's talk about the fact that once a month we have the flea market out there. I'm not naive enough to believe that there's nothing stolen at the flea market, and that there's no criminal activity taking place at the flea market. But we don't cancel the flea market any more than we really need to be canceling these gun shows. The problem is stopping the gun shows from occurring. Set aside the state statute, the Metro Charter Ordinance, and the fact that there are contracts 2 years into the future that require these things to be able to continue forward. There's just not enough reason to believe that stopping the gun show activities, most of which is perfectly legal under state and federal law, is really going to have any positive detrimental effect on the future commission of any crime.
Okay.
And I should say, I totally agree with at least this part of what John has said, is that this is a small part of the problem, that there is a bigger problem at stake. And I don't, maybe misconstrue a little bit of what you said, but the point is that gun show sales are a small part of the gun industry. And one of the real major problems is stolen guns, at least in the city of Memphis and in Nashville and all the urban areas and across the state. Stolen guns are used in criminal activity frequently, and that's one of the major areas of concern. Of course, since this is such a small step, one would think it would not create such controversy, that it is such a limited step for a limited industry that we should be able to get this done. and then we could move on to the big things like trying to enhance penalties for stolen guns. But we can't get this little thing done, this small part of the gun industry done. And so that, speaks volumes about kind of where we are and the kind of risks that we expose ourselves to, just so just so folks can have kind of this unfettered and unrealistic Second Amendment right.
It just speaks to how many calls we have too. Let's go to Billy. Billy on line 3. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. I don't believe you'll ever solve the problem with guns getting into the hands of people that shouldn't have them. That'll always be a problem with that. But I believe that the real problem is Nashville nightlife, and then you got the drugs and alcohol, and then you got moral decline, and no respect of human life, it doesn't seem like anymore. And I think that's a bigger problem than the guns.
Okay. Thank you, Billy. I'm just going to keep going. Let's go to Phil. Hello, Phil. Are you there, Phil? I may have your name wrong. Let's go to Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hey, how you doing?
Go right ahead.
Okay, I've been attending that Goodman show for several years, and I noticed starting about 3 years ago, every table's got a sign on it that says background check required.
That's of the vendors. Now, private sales, that's not the case.
Well, okay. Yeah, I said every table.
Right.
And not every table is occupied by a licensed dealer. Now, if I just wonder what the magnitude of the problem is. How many people get shot at the gun show, or how many stolen guns get sold there, or how many illegal transfers are there? Can anybody pin that down with an intellectually honest number?
All we have at this point is from the assistant DA who testified there were 3 cases in the last several years. I don't think they're solid numbers. I think solid numbers are hard to come by. The argument that there's so many guns out there that doing this doesn't really help, I don't know if that's a solid argument. Is that part of what you're saying?
The point is that if we're going to take a step that impedes the rights of legitimate businesses and citizens to engage in activities that's legal by and large, because of the concern that an occasional, because we can't quantify the frequency, transaction may result in a firearm that somewhere down the road ends up being involved in a crime, it's preposterous to think that we should allow a governmental body, forget about if it's a private venue owner, but should we allow a governmental body to exercise, or maybe arbitrarily exercise, the discretion that they have to tell that legal business, those legal vendors, you're no longer welcome, and because we think that it's somehow going to stop an illegal transfer in the future.
And I'll just say to that there is a long history of people losing their leases because of one instance of criminal activity, because of 2 instances of criminal activity. I have rental property, and maybe you two do too, but in one of my tenants has one instance of foul gunplay, of illegal gun activity on the property, then I'm not going to renew that tenant's lease. In the same vein, in the public housing projects, for years, tenants have been evicted because of one instance of criminal misbehavior. You lose your housing in the public housing projects. Private landlords like myself kick people out because of one instance. And so because the city of Nashville and the Fairgrounds board decided to kick out gun show sellers because of a handful of instances of criminal activity is not surprising. It's pretty consistent with what every landlord does in almost every case I can think of.
Okay. All right. Do you want to, or I'm going to take another call here.
You got calls.
All right. Let's see. We have a ton of calls. Let's go to Keith. Hello, Keith.
Hello, how you doing?
Go right ahead.
And appreciate you having me on. One of the things that I've noticed on the show is that you're talking about private dealers.
Right.
The Nashville Fairgrounds. Well, one of the things I've noticed is that in the last year or so, that they require all private sellers to have background checks done on all firearm sales.
I mean, if that's true, it seems like the problem is solved. I mean, this is halted until new rules are put into place. If those are actually the rules, it seems like problem solved.
Those are the rules. If you go to the fairgrounds and you sell guns, private dealers, you will do a background check on all firearms. That is a new rule they put in place.
Okay, is that your understanding, John?
Well, I mean, even if that's the rule that these promoters have voluntarily imposed on their vendors, you know, in deference to the senator's, you know, concerns, that doesn't have anything to do with what transpires out in the parking lot once you're outside the building. So I don't dispute that it's possible that some law may have been violated here, there, or yonder. You know, nobody's been shot at a gun show. Nobody's been robbed that we know of at a gun show. So these are just, according to this district attorney, some tracing that they've done to say that some gun at some point that was used in a crime at some point in its history came through a gun show. And it may have passed through 1, 2, or 3 other people before it got there, or been stolen, because that happens a lot. It's just the question becomes ultimately for us is it enough to justify shutting down an otherwise illegal activity?
Okay, we're going to take a break. If you're online, hold on. We will get to your call. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.